The Engineer and the Dwarfs, Part 4. German folk tale. Yes, don't you think it is original and attractive? Said Nora. There are so many hotels called Hotel Hohenzollern' or the German Emperor, and so I thought we would have a change. It is a splendid idea, said Karl, who was over head and ears in love with Nora by this time and thought that everything she did and said was perfect. Still, like a prudent German, he wondered to himself if she would make a good housewife. He knew she must be good at cleaning or the dwarfs would hardly have employed her, but her dainty little hands did not look like cooking. What would it matter, if the dinner were burnt sometimes, he thought, if I could have such a pretty, fascinating little girl to marry me. Will you come in and have some breakfast? Said Nora as they approached Hotel Fancy. Rather, he said, I must own that I am famished. I only had a dry bit of bread and cheese for supper, and that is a long while ago. It was early still, Nora's father was not yet up, so she set to work and lit the fire, and soon had the water boiling for coffee. She set a fine breakfast before him, ham and eggs and sausage and rolls. I am bound in strict veracity to say that love did not prevent his consuming a large amount. He changed his mind about her cooking, and thought that she could do everything well and was a model of perfection. Do have some, too, yourself, he said, and Nora soon joined him with a hearty appetite. Mr. O'Brien, for that was the name of Nora's father, was astonished to find them at breakfast when he entered the comfortably furnished parlor. An early guest, father, said Nora. He is going to put up here for the present. He is an engineer at work on the tunnel. Good thing for us, she whispered the last sentence. I will see about getting your room ready, she said, turning to Karl. Please do not trouble, said he. I'm due at the tunnel again at 7 a.m. and it is 6 o'clock now. I hope to return tonight about 8 o'clock, then I shall be glad of a room, he said, with a hardly suppressed yawn. Pray excuse me, I had rather a bad night, he added with a twinkle in his eyes that only Nora perceived. As soon as he was gone, Nora handed some gold pieces to her father. And do you think that I am doing right in taking this money from you, Nora? He asked. Why, of course, father, I'm telling you that it's fairy gold, and will bring us luck, she replied. The Irish have a great respect for luck and omens, many of them still believe in the good folk, and Mr. O'Brien, who was of a very easygoing disposition, was quite satisfied with this explanation. Some weeks passed. Karl and Nora became better friends every day. All Karl's previous notions of the universe had been knocked on the head by his visit to Dwarfland. He had thought that he knew almost everything that there was to be known, but now he was always on the lookout for surprises. Moreover, his love for Nora had opened his eyes. Every bush seemed ablaze with fire, and the roses and pinks in the garden smelt as they had never smelt before. Nora was like a fairy princess. She was not easy to win. She loved her freedom, and wished to call no man lord and master. Because she was such a wild bird and of a poetic and dreamy temperament, Karl's practical mind appealed to her. He possessed that which she and her father lacked. She was tired of her father's promises and castles in the air, which usually ended in bitter disappointment. How many guests had they had since Hotel Fancy had been opened? She could almost count them on her fingers. The peasants frequented the old inn that they were accustomed to in the village, and very few strangers came their way. I will play waiter on Sunday and help you, said Karl one Saturday evening when he had returned from his work. Indeed, and you'll not need to, said Nora with a pretty Irish lilt in her voice. It's not many people that will be coming. It will be different, of course, when the new station is built, then we shall be flourishing, she continued. It was a fine Sunday afternoon. Karl and Nora sat in the garden under the plane trees which made a checkered pattern in shadow on the ground, and sipped glasses of apple wine or cider in German fashion. It was a queer thing that we two should meet in the little people's land. It seems as if we were meant to pull together, doesn't it? Said Karl with an effort. Nora jumped up immediately, saying that she must see if the water was boiling for coffee. No, no, said Karl, catching her by the hand, you are not going to run away like that. You've just got to listen to me, Nora, for I can't keep it in any longer. You are my fairy princess. I love you with all my heart, and I want you to promise me to be my little wife, will you? You don't know me yet, said Nora, blushing like a rose. I've got a most awful temper. I'll risk it, said Carl laughing, and they plighted their troth under the trees in the garden with no one but the empty chairs and tables looking on, that were spread in anticipation of the guests who had not arrived. So Carl and Nora were engaged to be married and were as happy as ever it is possible to be in this world. They did not celebrate the event in the usual ceremonious German fashion, for Nora's friends and relations were in Ireland and she had only a few acquaintances in Germany as yet. Carl's mother was a widow, and lived with her married daughter in Pomerania, so she could not come so far south for anything less than a wedding or a funeral. Now Carl began to consider the material side of the question. Will the love that we are rich in, light the fire in the kitchen, and the little god of love turn the spit? Oh, what had they to live on? He was a young man, and his income was very small. It takes many years in Germany to make a career as engineer, unless you are exceptionally lucky and have influential friends. Hotel fancy was rather like its name and did not pay it at all as yet. Now Carl had not forgotten the dwarfs, and Nora began to miss the gold pieces which had disappeared fast enough in the last few weeks. I tell you what, she said, we will go together to Dwarfland. You can arrange about the electric light, and I will do some metal polishing. We will meet afterwards and come home again together. It will be splendid fun. How can we get there? Asked Carl somewhat dubiously. Why, the same way as we came out through the rocky gap. I know the way as well as anything. I have been there frequently, said Nora. It was early autumn, the evenings had begun to close in. Carl had managed to get off earlier than usual, still it was almost dusk as the two set out to go to Dwarfland. The sun was setting and threw a wonderful golden glow over the world that was reflected in the hearts of the young lovers. My stones must be there still, said Carl as they came to the little brook, for who could have taken them away? Yet to his surprise there were no stones there, neither were any to be found in the neighborhood. There was nothing for it, but to carry Nora over. He did not feel so shy and embarrassed this time, as he picked up his little sweetheart laughing and struggling in his arms. You are as light as a feather, he said as he set her down again. A feather bed, you mean, she said, and they are a pretty fair weight. I shall never get used to German feather beds, she continued. I can't even get them to look right when I make them and shake them. You need to be born and brought up to them to appreciate them, he replied, but never mind, what does it matter, what is a feather bed in comparison with our love? They laughed for pure joy and good humor as they walked along. Ah, how quickly time passes when one is so happy. The sunlight gilded the rocks before them, till they looked as if they contained streaks of gold ore. They crossed the little moor, and clambered over the rocks till they reached the stunted fir grove. Looking back they saw that the sky had become a glowing red as it often does just before the light dies out. Seen through the dark, twisted trees the wood appeared to be on fire. The lovers sat down and gazed for a few moments in silence till the glory faded from the sky. Now for it, Nora, said Carl getting up and offering her a hand, the way down into Dwarfland must be quite near here. Of course I know, I can find it at once, she answered. They searched carefully around for the great crack in the rocks, but could find nothing in the least resembling it. How absurd, how can we miss it when it is certainly not more than a yard or two away, said Nora. The steps were not so easily recognizable, if I remember rightly, said Carl, but we are sure to find them in a minute. It grew darker and darker, the mountain was covered with boulders of stone, juniper bushes and stunted trees, but no trace of the great rent in the mountainside could they discover. Did we dream it all? Said Carl. Impossible, why I have been down there many times, said Nora beginning to feel bitterly disappointed. Supposing I were to fetch some of my men here and blow up the rocks with dynamite, we must be able to get in then, for the mountain is as full of dwarfs as bees in a hive, said Carl, who was getting in a temper. And do you think they would reward you handsomely for your services? Said Nora sarcastically, and oh the poor little men, they always treated me with the utmost kindness and politeness, and gave me far more money than ever I bargained for. They nearly pinched me black and blue, till I frightened them with my revolver, said Carl. The wretches, said Nora, but why? Because I was silly enough to tell them about the airship, and they thought I was humbugging them. How absurd, Nora exclaimed, but what are we to do now, Carl? She continued in a doleful voice. I must have some money, We are still in debt for the greater part of our furniture, and the house is heavily mortgaged. If I could only get a good post, said Carl, sighing deeply, I had reckoned on those dwarf chaps. To be continued.